This term at Globe Focus, we're going to be looking at the life of Elijah. It may be that you know some of the stories, or it may be that you're not very familiar with Elijah at all. Here's a little bit of background to fill in the stories so far. You read about Elijah in the book of 1 and 2 Kings. Now it's important to ask the question, who were those books first written for? So before we understand what they say to us, we need to think who they were first for. They were written at a time when God's people Israel were in exile. That is, they had sinned against God and had been sent away from their land into a foreign land as a punishment for their sin. And the book of 1 and 2 Kings explains to Israel why they've ended up in exile. It shows them how their repeated rebellion against God, their refusal to listen to the prophets who speak the word of life, how that has led them to the place of exile. Now this fits into the bigger picture of the Bible, so let me give you a quick outline of the story of the Bible so far so you can see where we're at. The story of the Bible is this sort of shape, and it starts with God creating the world, a beautiful world, a good world, a world where God was king and humanity was designed to live in relationship with him. But human beings rebelled against God, and so we have what is called the fall. Humanity, rather than living in the perfect place God had designed for them, instead experienced death. They were sent away from God's presence, away from relationship with God. But God wasn't finished with human beings. He came to a man called Abraham, and he promised Abraham that through him there would be a nation, a chosen people, a people who would be called Israel. And that through this nation, God would then bring blessing to the whole world. And so the story of the Bible now becomes the story of Israel. And God cares for Israel and leads Israel and takes them into the promised land. And after a few hundred years, God gives them a king. And the king that God gives them is David. A king after God's own heart, a king who loves God and loves God's law, a king who leads the people in righteousness. And when David is on the throne and then his son Solomon is on the throne, things are good. But sadly, things go wrong from there. From there, the nation of Israel splits into two, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Israel in the north, Judah in the south. And the book of 1 and 2 Kings traces the story of those two nations. We're told of king after king after king after king who come. And the tragedy is that over and over again we see these kings do not follow David, but instead lead God's people away from God. And we're going to pick up the story when a particularly wicked king is on the throne of Israel, the northern kingdom. His name was Ahab. And we're going to discover how he led God's people into a place of death. But alongside Ahab, as Ahab is on the throne, God sends the prophet Elijah. And Elijah comes to speak to God's people at a point where they're facing death, and he comes to speak the words of life. That's what we're going to see this term as we listen and see the stories of Elijah. And all of it is pointing us beyond these kings to the great king that God has promised, Jesus, who speaks the words of life and gives his life in order that the whole world might know the blessing that God has promised. So I really hope these stories are going to excite you and help you to learn more of who God is and help you to see just how much we need his words of life.